Yeah, so my name is Bryan Lamb. I guess about me, I'm from Texas. I grew up in Texas. I was born in the Tyler area, moved to Dallas area pretty quickly. Grew up in a suburb outside of Dallas. Went to Texas A&M for my undergraduate degree. It was about 4 or 5 years ago when I started to kind of realize that oppression and racism really did exist, and it wasn't this thing that was talked about that was, just made up as some kind of excuse for things or something like that, or that wasn't just a part of history that no longer existed. And a lot has happened since then. And I was in an interesting position being at A&M when I realized all of that, because historically A&M doesn't have a good track record in regards to non-white males for that. I was 20 when the process started, and somewhere around 21 when it really started to click. Pinpointing the exact time it clicked would be really difficult, but I can definitely narrow it down to a matter of within a couple months of when the major transition happened, and that would have been really at that point around 21.
So 2021, leading up to that.
Yeah.
Okay. What was going on in your life at that time?
So I was an RA, I was a resident advisor. I had gotten the job, and as part of the training, you had to go through this diversity training. And I say it that way because people, and I did especially at that time, kind of approached it as this thing that you have to do to get the job, and what's the big deal? None of this is a problem anyways. And so kind of approached it with that mindset. And the training that year, actually, and this is quite interesting, the training that year irritated me. And so it's really, I don't know, I look back on it now and I kind of chuckle because it's the training that irritated me that eventually led to me realizing how important that training was. So I go through this training, it was in the summer, so it would have been in August. It would have been in August going into my junior year, so it would have been August 2007. And I got mad at something they said that was true. I mean, they were trying to tell us, it was a very low impact training. It was like this questionnaire of to figure out how much privilege you have. Now knowing what I know now, the way it was gone about was why it led to a lot of people being irritated, because it wasn't done very, it wasn't done developmentally necessarily at the level it needed to be for where I was at the time, the people that were with me. But I got mad, and there was an organization that was a student group. There was a student. It was a peer-to-peer diversity education group, and so they did diversity trainings, and it was through the department that I was employed by. So they were doing the training. So I was like, I'm going to join this group, and I'm going to show them how they're messing this up, and how this is not a big deal. At the time, I felt like I was being preached at. And what I realize now is that it was resistance, because the question, it was that, and I know you've probably seen it before. It's a pretty common one, and it's just literally like, are there people? It's the one where are there people that are in power that look like you? Would you know where to go to get these certain resources? What about these resources? And I was resistant because I was in that mindset of, well, I'm come from a middle class white background. I'm not some rich guy. I'm not privileged. My parents worked hard, my family worked hard, that kind of mentality. And so the whole thing as a whole, I think it struck a chord, but I wasn't open for it at the time, so I instead got angry. I was like, this is stupid. I'm going to join them, and I'm going to show them how stupid they are.
Okay.
I'm going to show these guys, show them what's up. And I was doing the training the next year as a facilitator. By the next year at the next training. In 08, I was one of the people that was leading the training. And I don't really know, now looking back on it, I was like, what was I even thinking I was going to do? I don't know. It's hard to really say. Maybe there's a part of me that was kind of realizing some of this stuff might be true, and so there was a piece of curiosity, but it was under the guise of, wow, I'm going to show them what's up and change something. it wasn't long after that I started to realize, they were right. This is really going on. And it's kind of funny, you know. And that's whenever I started to realize, I think, that oppression was this systemic issue in our country. But I was in this system that was A&M at the time, and it was still present from the generations past, and things that were in place, given that the history was it was an all-white, all-male military college to begin with. And it wasn't, we weren't but like, what, 20 or 30 years out of it being that still. I mean, it was one of the last institutions in the country to actually start allowing women in, and then to also start allowing people of color in. So my understanding of it at A&M was that it was this way of being if you were white, and that it just was, and that you weren't to question it because that's how things were, and but that it wasn't given the name oppression, that it was given the name like truth. I recognize what it is now. At the time, it was, no, these things are right. No, these aren't stereotypes. This is how it is. I've seen everything. Mm-hmm. Grew up in a suburb outside of Dallas. Of course, I know it all. And then I went to A&M. No, this is how it is. I was on campus when Obama got elected. So I think that the year before that, there was a blackface video that came out at A&M. And there's a few students that got kicked out of the university. They put this blackface video up on YouTube. And then there's a very strong young conservatives student group. I think now I think they still go under that same name. Similar, yeah, so they were doing stuff during the election time. So this, I guess it was 4 years ago right now, where they would have like a picture of Obama up, and they were egging. You could pay to throw an egg at the picture of Obama. Well, then like Fox News, like CNN comes out or something. CNN covered that one, so they covered the blackface that was like the year previous, and then they covered the Obama egging, right? So then it became very clear that regardless of what people said, there was an atmosphere in which people felt like it was okay to do these things. All this is going on as I'm really coming to terms with what is oppression, what is racism, what does it mean to be white, what does it mean to be white and male, what does it mean to be white, male, and straight, and going to a historically conservative university that has had this history that is still being made and being covered nationwide. So it was very in the face. There was no escaping it. It was one of those realizations that once you realized it was going on, there was not a way then to get away from it and just like find some liberal friends and be like, oh, well, racism is bad, let's just forget about it and go, put a sticker on our car. No, it's like you're going to walk through campus, you're going to see a picture of a black man's face with eggs being thrown at it. And so then it all culminated with the night of the election. So at that point, I guess it was my senior year, and I, at this point, was involved more strongly with the group on campus that was doing the diversity work, and was really starting to learn about these things. And so then had started to make friends that were also a part of this work, and some friends that were people of color that were experiencing this stuff as someone that wasn't white. And it was easy for me to ignore or not even notice some of this. So I could walk through campus and there's no big deal, but they were confronted with it on a daily basis. And so I'd become friends, particularly with one person, and it was through all of this, and I'm still friends with him now. And we were close enough that he would tell me what it was like, the election night when Obama won. He was afraid. He stayed in his room. He didn't want to go outside on campus because he didn't know how the students were going to react. Because it was clear the atmosphere on the campus was very much against that. It was that next day or two when I was talking to him, I had started to realize as things were leading up, I was like, wow, I didn't realize the implications of a lot of this stuff. I realized, oh, that's not good. That was kind of where it stopped. I couldn't yet make those connections of, wow, that's not good. But then there's these other things, and then under the surface of all of it is this other stuff too. It was just kind of you shouldn't do that, and then I'd kind of keep going. And it was when that happened, and then I was able to reflect on everything that had happened building up. It was like, wow, because I'm white, I had no clue what it was like for you to have to go to school and live on this campus during all of this election time when the atmosphere on this campus was very hostile towards a black man. And then that, I think, is when one of the most significant times when it clicked of I really don't know what it's like. Now I'm starting to understand that these things exist, but that moment was a wow, these don't just exist, this is your life, this is your experience on a daily basis, to the point where you know it's not safe for you to go outside on this campus because you just can't be sure of what people might do. But that was probably the realization where I really started to get that there was an experience outside of my own that didn't see everything going on here as fine and dandy, because the campus has this big, we're all nice to each other, and we're all Aggies, and that exists, but there's still this other stuff going on, and I was able to cling on to well, it's this A&M, and everybody's so nice, but it was like, well, and it's not, they're not all nice. It was us talking about the stuff that had kind of happened, and then he was just like, yeah, it was pretty scary, and all that was going on, and then it was immediately it was oh wow, I really don't get it. I really don't get it, because I walked around that night, go get some coffee or something, and get something to eat. Didn't even think twice about it. Wow, that's what I really, really don't get it. I felt one of the most obvious ever times in my life where it was, the impact of privilege was so clear that there was nothing you could do to not see it. And the way that actually felt, to give it words, is almost all emotions possible. There's a piece of anger. This is my friend, and my friend is having this experience. There's a piece of embarrassment of like, wow. And most of all, it was just like kind of overall, it's hard to explain. Overall, just kind of shock. Like, how could I have missed it for this long? It was kind of, yeah. Just how could I have missed this? I was kind of baffled. It was like, wow, this is so obvious once he says it. And then it was a wow. Like, you cannot deny the privileges at work here, because I am able, because of that, to walk around oblivious. It made me sad, and then it also added that fuel. It's very easy to discount something you hear about, but when it's a person that you know sitting across the table from you, who you've become more close with and have started to build this relationship with, so now feels comfortable enough to say, this was my experience. It's just overall, it's like really disappointing. And then motivating. Because I knew like he was doing something about it, he was being active. Still is. And it was if he has to live in this, and he's doing something about it, and then here I am as an outsider who spent most of, at that point I was very fresh in these realizations, so spent 20 years reinforcing this thing, so I have a clear part in his experience, and this negative experience, and this feeling this way. Well, now I have no way to not do something about it. This is not something that can be dismissed. At first you're like, that's ridiculous, that shouldn't be happening anywhere. And then there's we need to do something about this, but then later on you're like, oh, wait a minute, I've only even started to accept that racism exists for a few months. So I've spent all my life making this possible. And there's some responsibility, I think, that comes next with that. You either at that So for me, either at that point, it's a tuck tail and run, and then be one of those like, don't bully people. I'm just gonna like sit over here, and I'm gonna be way out here, like that's not good, and then just kind of blend in. Or it's okay, let's address this because it's been going on for this long. I've been a part of it, so I can either continue to be a part of it or not. There's no middle ground at that point. You're either enforcing the system or doing what you can to try to break that down. I mean, at the time, it wasn't even an option. I mean, for me, it was, these are my two choices, but like, how can I as a person continue going throughout my life knowing that it's at the expense of so many people, and then that one of those people is sitting here. So it was a pretty quick choice. Now the choice didn't include what's going to happen. It was that there's a choice, I'm going to do something. What that do something looked like, I had no clue. But at the time, it was just, okay, something needs to be done. But I don't know what that's going to look like yet. But I knew that I was going to need to do something. If anything, it was educate myself. I mean, the minimal commitment at that point was educate myself more. Because no matter what, it's just that for me, there was this moment when I was like, when you get it, when you quote get it, like, oh, I get it now. And you're like, now I get it all. That was a very, very important reminder that, there's a lot of education. This is a lifelong process now. I've spent 21 years ignoring and learning how to be the opposite of this. It's not going to be something that I can unlearn in a moment. Now I'm not a racist. That wasn't. Okay, so at that point, at the minimum was to learn more. And then where I ended up falling in the spectrum between learning and doing. Yeah, there's a tuck tail and run, or there's a stand up and open yourself. Stand up and become more vulnerable. That's where the decision got more difficult in terms of what does it look like? Because I was very much aware then that being someone that was more vocal about the existence of oppression meant that you were someone that was more open to the negative aspects of it. So it was that's where it got more difficult. That's where it was much easier to just take that, I'm going to educate myself, and occasionally I might I'll talk to a person of color about racism, and every once in a while a white guy. Right? Or because there was this awareness that being a white person that starts to talk about this stuff was not necessarily gonna. I don't know. It's hard to say what I would say next, because by no means is it more difficult than being a non-white person. But I was aware of that I was to a degree I was going to be challenging my own privilege. What that was going to come with, I didn't know. I didn't know. But there was this, this uneasiness. What is this going to be like? Like, in a sense, you're like, are you stupid, man? You got all this privilege, and now you're going to start telling people that's not okay. And there's been that reaction on occasion. And I don't want to, and I'm hesitant to say, to speak on that, because the cost in comparison to the people that don't have that privilege is extremely minuscule. It's not like I'm all of a sudden going to be oppressed. But there have been moments where people kind of have this reaction, and they're like, okay, so privilege exists, but are you why do you care? You're kind of in terms of the privilege ladder, and you're pretty close to the top. Why are you? And shouldn't you be okay with that? Well, no, I'm not.